Friends, today we are going to discuss about the second chapter of Standard 11th, and that is classification of organisms. Now, classification means what? I think you must have studied the same thing, that is classification, in chapter 1. See, classification is nothing but a kind of scientific method to give rise to different groups of organisms. So classification is nothing but the grouping of organisms depending upon the dissimilarities and similarities of characters between them. So classification is a scientific method, scientific approach rather say, in which the organisms are grouped depending upon the structural and functional similarities and dissimilarities. And whatever the naming of the group is done among them is called taxa. We know that the group denotes a taxa, and the largest taxa is the kingdom, and the smallest taxa is the species. This we have studied in chapter 1st. So kingdom is the largest taxon in classification, whereas the species is the smallest taxon of classification. In other words, species is known as the unit of classification. So friends, when we move from kingdom to species in classification, what happens? The similarities increases and the differences decreases. When we move from kingdom to species in a classification system, the similarities among the organisms increases, whereas the differences between them decreases. In other language, if we want to classify the same thing, when we move from species to kingdom in a classification system, what will happen? The vice versa happens. That means similarities decreases and differences increases. So this was the brief view of classification. Since the dawn of civilization, that means when the civilization was established, from there various attempts have been made to classify the living organisms. Initially, the classification of living organisms was solely depending upon the needs of the organisms, how any organisms are being utilized. Depending upon that, the classification of organism was done. As the time progressed, various philosophers and scientists tried their best to classify the living organisms, and one known scientist or philosopher was Aristotle. Aristotle was a Greek philosopher who classified the living organisms depending upon their simple morphological characters. He was the first to classify the living organism depending upon their characters. Before that, the classification was only done depending upon the needs of the organism. And that's why Aristotle is known as father of biology. Keep the same thing in your mind, students. Aristotle is known as the father of biology. He classified plants into three groups depending upon their height. The larger or taller ones were known as trees. The smallest ones were known as herbs, and the middle ones, which do not fall in any category, they are grouped into shrubs. So, initially, there were three groups of plants, and this was done with the help of Aristotle. He also tried to classify the animals into two groups. One group of animals which was having red blood in their body, and another group which do not possess red blood in their body. This was the initial system of classification which was developed by Aristotle, who was father of biology. Later on, a known scientist known as Carolus Linnaeus. I think you must have heard about Carolus Linnaeus. Carolus Linnaeus is known as the father of classification. He proposed a method for naming the organisms, which is called binomial nomenclature method. And Carolus Linnaeus he proposed a new type of classification system, which was called two-kingdom system of classification. That means he classified all the living organisms in just two big groups, two big kingdoms. The name of one kingdom was Plantae, and another one is called Animalia. So only two kingdoms were there in the initial system of classification proposed by Linnaeus. So all the living organisms of the world were grouped into two kingdoms, either plants or animals, either Plantae or Animalia. But see, he did not take some of the characters into consideration for grouping the organisms. He did not classify the organisms depending upon their cell structure. That means either they are prokaryotic or eukaryotic. Either they are unicellular or they are multicellular. Either they are autotrophic or they are heterotrophic. These characters, simple characters, were not taken into consideration by Carolus Linnaeus for two-kingdom system of classification. And so that it was happened that some of the organisms do not fall into either category. See, because the basic characters were not adapted at that time. Although the two kingdom system of classification, which was proposed by Carolus Linnaeus, was adapted and it was in effect for a long time. Most of the scientists, most of the persons which were there, who were studying biology, who were doing research in biology, they have taken two kingdom system of classification into consideration for a longer time. But as the time progressed, more and more new and new characters were taken, new characters were adapted, and new systems of classification were proposed. And those characters include, that means it was need of that particular era to adapt the new characters like cell type, mode of nutrition, habitat, body organization, mode of reproduction, and evolutionary, or rather say phylogenetic aspect. Cell type, mode of nutrition, habitat, that means natural habitat of the organism, body organization of the organism, reproduction of the organism, and evolutionary or phylogenetic aspect of the organism. These were the characters. It was demand of the time to take consideration about these characters. So, as the time progressed, new and new classification systems were established. New and new inventions were made. New classification systems were proposed from time to time by different scientists. But the common thing among them was that the kingdom Plantae and kingdom Animalia, both kingdoms remained the same. That is okay, that in this Plantae and Animalia kingdom, the organisms were differed. Some of the organisms are added gradually and some of them were removed from time to time, depending upon their characters, depending upon their dissimilarities. But the kingdom Plantae and kingdom Animalia were same at the time. So this was the contribution of Carolus Linnaeus in systematics or classification. He proposed two kingdom system of classification. But later on, after so many years, that means we can say in recent times, in 1969, a scientist known as R.H. Whittaker Friends, remember, in 1969, a scientist known as R.H. Whittaker, he proposed a new classification system. And this was 5-kingdom system of classification. He divided all the living organisms into 5 groups. Those are called kingdoms of organisms. The first kingdom was Monera. The second one is called Protista or Protists. The third kingdom was called Fungi. The fourth one was Plantae, and the fifth one was Animalia. So, all the living organisms at the time, that is in 1969, were divided into 5 kingdoms. And this was known as a 5-kingdom system of classification, which was proposed by Vitel. Which were the characters depending upon which all the organisms were classified? The first one was cell type. Among them, only Monera were prokaryotic in nature. That means, pro means primitive and karyotic means nucleus. Primitive kind of nucleus, that means nucleus without nuclear membrane was present in the organisms of Monera kingdom. But the remaining ones were all eukaryotic in nature. So this is eukaryotic. This is also eukaryotic, eukaryotic, and eukaryotic. The second character was about nuclear membrane. As I told you earlier, nuclear membrane is absent in prokaryotic cells. It is present in eukaryotic cell. So, if we want to differentiate the 5 kingdoms, we can say that in Monera, nuclear membrane is absent, but it is present in Protista, Fungi, Plantae, and Animalia. The third characteristic of 5-kingdom system of classification, it was nothing but body organization. The prokaryotic ones, that means the organisms of this kingdom, were unicellular in nature. The Protista were also unicellular in nature. The fungi, they were multicellular. But they were having loose tissue organization. In Plantae, tissues were formed, through tissues, and organs were created. Whereas in animals, tissue was there, organs were there, and organ systems were established. So, the first character was cell type, the second character, nuclear membrane, the third character, that is body organization. The fourth character of 5-kingdom system of classification, which was proposed by R.H. Whittaker in 1969. Which was that? It was nothing but mode of nutrition. See, in Monera, the mode of nutrition, it was autotrophic and heterotrophic. Autotrophic, that means they can synthesize their own food. And heterotrophic, they have to depend upon others for the production of food. Autotrophic mode of nutrition is again subdivided into two types: photosynthetic and chemosynthetic. Two types of autotrophic nutrition were there in Monera, whereas heterotrophic nutrition, parasitic and saprophytic. So this was the fourth character, we can say. The first one, cell type; the second, nuclear membrane; the third one, body organization; the fourth one, mode of nutrition; and the fifth one is nothing but cell wall. That we will discuss after this one. In Protista, the mode of nutrition was autotrophic, but only photosynthetic and heterotrophic. In fungi, the mode of nutrition was only heterotrophic, either parasitic or saprophytic. What is the difference between parasitic and saprophytic? Can you tell me? In parasitic, the organism obtains nutrition from another living organism. In saprophytic, the nutrition is obtained from dead and decaying matter, organic matter. In plantae, the mode of nutrition is only autotrophic, and that is photosynthetic. And in plantae, so in Animalia, the mode of nutrition is heterotrophic, one is holozoic kind of nutrition, and another one is parasitic nutrition. And fifth one, cell wall. In Monera, the cell wall is non-cellulosic. That means cellulose is absent in the cell wall of Monera kingdom organisms. That means the cell wall of organisms of Monera kingdom is made up of polysaccharides plus amino acids. In Protista, the cell wall, which is made up of cellulose, will be present in some organisms, and it will be absent in some organisms. In fungi, it contains chitin. The cell wall is present, and cell wall is made up of chitin. In plantae, the cell wall is made up of cellulose, whereas in Animalia kingdom, the cell wall is completely absent. So we can say that the five kingdom system of classification, which was proposed by R.H. Whittaker in 1969, was depending upon the different characters like cell type, nuclear membrane, body organization, mode of nutrition, presence of cell wall or nature of cell wall, and the types of reproduction or the mode of reproduction, friends. So this was all about the initial systems of classification which was proposed by different scientists at different levels. So in next chapter, that is next lecture, we are going to study about the six kingdom system of classification as well as the different kingdoms and their characters. Right? So concentrate on the table, and this lecture will be followed by a short test. You have to submit your answers. Right? Concentrate on the board.